All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Living the Dream podcast. Today on the show, we are going to talk about the laws of success, initiative, and leadership. That's the next chapter Napoleon Hill goes through. And first, we'll start with what is it? Initiative is doing what ought to be done without being told to do it. When I think of initiative, I also kind of think of integrity, which is doing the right thing when nobody's around. But initiative is like you're just doing it without anybody telling you to do it. I also think of entrepreneurship a lot when I think of initiative. Entrepreneurs usually see a problem, take ownership of the problem, and then try to solve the problem. And that's really what you're doing what ought to be done without being told to do it. Now, obviously, there are a lot of benefits for that, right? Um, in entrepreneurship specifically, but you can also do this just in the everyday world. Like you can serve people in a way that ought to be done without being told to do it. And that's when you have nonprofits popping up. That's when you have just acts of kindness popping up, right? Just doing things that ought to be done without being told to do it. And initiative and leadership are they go hand in hand. Like leaders have to have initiative, and initiative doesn't have to be in a business setting, a nonprofit setting. It can be in a very personal setting, like helping an old lady across the street. That ought to be done, but nobody told you to do it. That is the sign of initiative and a leader. So that's what Napoleon Hill talks about for initiative. And he also talked about leadership coming to people. So I was skimming. Now I've read the chapter, but I didn't reread the chapter for this. I just skimmed it, and I couldn't find a clear definition for leadership. But leadership is like leading people towards something, I would say. And he kind of echoes that with what he says is required for leadership. It really comes to people, and it comes to those people who take initiative. They have a definite purpose, and they display self-confidence. So when you are really pursuing something, that definite purpose, and you have the confidence to share it with people and take action towards it, and the initiative to do what ought to be done without being told to do it, that really gets to a point where people will follow you. Because if you're doing something that ought to be done, it probably touches at the core of humanity. And when we touch at the core of humanity, it resonates with people. And when we get in touch with our authentic self, that's how we get to the core of humanity, because we are humans, right? And so really taking that initiative, having that definite purpose, displaying that self-confidence, and going after something is really what makes leadership come on to somebody. And then to define it a little more, he goes into brands of leadership. So there are the brands of leadership where it's like there's a vision that leads to destruction, like Hitler, like I think he talks about Napoleon. Like all these leaders were like very destructive forces, right? Like it ended up in Hitler was trying to pursue genocide. Then you have more benevolent leaders who have a more righteous purpose of like self-discovery, self-improvement, spiritual awakening, et cetera, et cetera. That could be pastors, presidents, depending on how you feel about the presidents. And like Jesus was a benevolent leader, right? Historical Jesus, Christian Jesus, whoever you want to talk about, Jesus existed. So yeah, he was one of those leaders that was like, this is for a good purpose. I am here for you. And so he says, he's talking about the brand of leadership where he's like, the leader is there to serve and uplift the people that are following him. And so it's just leading people towards a vision. And that vision is usually for the good of humanity because it comes from your core. And that's where initiative and self-confidence come into play. And he kind of goes into some steps that leaders need to have. And I really suggest you read this chapter because this is just kind of a brief synopsis of it. But he says you got to eliminate procrastination. I think that goes hand in hand with initiative. Like if you have initiative, you're probably not a big procrastinator, because when you're doing things that ought to be done, you're not waiting to do things, really, because those are things that ought to be done, not that you have to do. So if you take that initiative, you're probably killing procrastination. And he goes into how to kill procrastination all throughout the book, really. I really suggest you guys read this. It's called The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill. It's bigger than his more famous book, Think and Grow Rich. He has great books just across the board. He also says that self-sacrifice is essential, and leadership and imagination are tied together. So self-sacrifice being essential, that's like that servant leadership idea. Jesus died on the cross, right? There's no greater love than this, than to lay down your life for your friends. Like that's the type of leadership that Napoleon Hill is talking about. And to really sacrifice yourself for the people that are following you, to uplift them, to help them improve, to help them, actualize their role in the vision that they agree with, that you are going towards. And leadership and imagination being tied together. Imagination is the next chapter, so maybe we'll talk more about that in the next Law of Success series. But leadership and imagination being tied together, it makes sense to me because in leadership, you have that definite chief aim, and that definite chief aim can only come from your imagination. Like Napoleon Hill talks about getting really specific with feeling it, believing it, seeing it, and really specific on how you'll do it and how much money it will take and how much money you will get. And so those are really specific details where you have to use your imagination to put that stuff together and to actually see it. Like, can you see me ending poverty and raising the minimum standard of living to middle class America? Can I see it? And he's like, how are you going to do it? How much money is it going to take? And then repeat it to yourself using the law of auto suggestion. So that's really Napoleon Hill on initiative and leadership. Do what ought to be done without being told to do it. Leadership comes to people who take initiative, have a definite chief aim, and display that self-confidence. To be a leader, you're going to have to eliminate procrastination, focus on your brand of leadership, which is towards a moral good that touches at the core of humanity, and it's really there to serve the people who are following you. In addition to serving them, you're going to have to self-sacrifice. You're going to have to give, and give again. And then leadership and imagination are tied. And my assumption is because it's about the vision that the leader is following, that definite chief aim. And where has leadership shown up in my life? Both being led by Christ, that's who I tried to follow, but also I've had many coaches, many professors that have led me to really just to become me. It's like, hey, you can do this, like believe in yourself and get in touch with who you are and like what your potential actually is. Furthermore, be authentic. Like I've been led in that direction. And now here I am leading people in that direction. Like I've got this vision of like, I think, hey, we should raise vision away from unnecessary suffering, where we should raise the standard of living to middle class America, because I don't think anybody should struggle for food, water, shelter, or safety. And that my plan is like financial freedom and then focusing on that, right? So the plan's still a little murky in my head, which is probably why I'm not moving with as much speed. But I have a plan. I have a definite purpose. I'm moving towards that purpose, and I'm displaying confidence by even telling you, by telling myself every day, by living my life in a way that is coherent with that desire. I'm displaying that self-confidence. I'm taking that initiative with this podcast. I don't get paid for this right now, guys. Like I started this for free. I've recorded like 215 episodes right now, and it's still free. So that is initiative if I've ever seen it. So that's where it's shown up in my life, both being led and now taking the spot of a leader. Where I want it to show up in my life, I'd say I want more clarity. Napoleon Hill talks a lot about, and I'm going to do a podcast on this pretty soon, but he talks a lot about getting really specific with what you want and seeing it. And I am not like that right now. I'm pretty specific with some things, but like, even with like the amount of money I want to be bringing in per month right now, I have a decent amount coming in per month, but why not 20,000? Why not 30,000? Why not 40,000? Like I don't have it could be 20, 30, 40, 50. It could be whatever. I don't have a definite amount. I don't have a definite way to get to that amount, which is probably why I'm not there. So I was like, okay, how can I make $40,000 a month by the end of right now? I'm recording this on April 12th, 2022. How can I make $40,000 per month by the end of 2022? By December 31st, I want to pull in my first $40,000 month. How can I do it? If I started asking that question, I started creating a process, and I told myself every day, I'm going to get $40,000 per month. Shout out to Yev, who really sent this to me, really got me back on my Napoleon Hill grind. I'm going to make $40,000 per month, specific amount by this date, December 31st, 2022. By doing this, wholesaling land, getting people in my coaching business, buying multifamily real estate, whatever it may be. Look at that. I have things I'm doing, but it's not clear how I'm going to get to that $40,000 a month, right? You get clear on how you're going to do it, and then you repeat it to yourself twice a day, like Napoleon Hill says. And we often neglect the simple things, but that's where I want it to show up in my life. More clarity, which will allow for more speed and more initiative, right? More self-confidence. And how can you apply it to your life? Napoleon Hill talks about this. He goes, start taking initiative, really. He's like, do one thing every day that ought to be done when you're not asked to do it. And then there was something else he said. Hold on, I am flipping to it. But yeah, it's like you in your life right now, you can stop and say, okay, how can I help somebody How can I do one thing? How can I solve a problem that ought to be solved without anybody asking me to do it? Then he can also say, I'll look around until I find at least one thing that I can do each day that I have not been in the habit of doing, and that will be of value to others without expectation of pay. So A, do one definite thing each day that ought to be done without anybody telling you to do it. B, add value to people every day in a new way. Uh, and C, tell at least one person each day about the value of practicing this habit and doing something that ought to be done without being told to do it. So add value to people, do something that ought to be done without being told to do it, and tell somebody about the value of doing those two things. If you do that every day, those are 3 steps that Napoleon Hill talks about. And it's like, I guess the 4th step would be eliminate procrastination. Like, just start taking action, start making decisions, start being decisive. Often, speed kills in life, like especially in business. Speed is what works, but more than that, um, we often will lose time and stress over decisions that ultimately have a net zero impact. Like, you could do this or you could do this and nothing really changes, and we'll stress over which is better. Just make the decision, commit, and if you need to later, pivot. Obviously, there are some exceptions to this, like don't decide who you're going to marry in one day, but if I'm being honest, some people have done that and have more successful marriages than people who ruminated about it for 4 years. So that's that. Yeah, that's all I got for you. Thank you guys for listening. Make sure to check out my website and hit me up if you need help with anything or just want to chat. Make sure you apply this stuff to your life. And yeah, on that note, thank you guys for watching. Send this podcast to 1 to 3 people you know need to hear this message. Shoot us a 5-star review on iTunes, and we're out.